Chapter 4. General Instructions on What to Read for Self-Education. About reading basic books with elaboration. Inspirational books. Reading works of art. The role of imagination. Rereading. Reading criticism. 1. General instructions on what to read for self-education. What to read in particular should be indicated by specialists. This is not my task. But one cannot but give some general advice on this score. A. Do not read too much, that is, when the amount of reading begins to respond to quality, the latter should be preferred, that is, to reduce the number of books read. B. To read, as circumstances permit, only the best books you can get your hands on. C. From them, first of all, choose the most necessary and necessary. Some people advise, do not take a book that is not interesting for you. This is an absolute mistake. Whether the book is interesting or not is a secondary question. The first question is whether you need it or not. If, say, a natural scientist, I am not interested in the history of literature, this does not mean that I should not read it. It is necessary for education. Especially necessary, of course, are books on the specialty. D. Do not read books that are too easy or too difficult for us. We need books that we can beat, but that into doing so must put some effort. This was discussed earlier. It must be remembered that if the book bounces off the reader's head, then the reason for this is often not in the book, but in the fact that the reader does not make any effort so that it does not bounce. Laziness of thinking, inability to read, this is a common cause of this unfortunate phenomenon. E. When reading, keep, as far as possible, a certain plan. This is especially necessary at the beginning of the study of any science. The best place to start is with a good short tutorial, then work through a good manual. Let these be the first major books on this science. Then comes, if necessary, the elaboration of the most important, basic works on individual issues. If a person who does not know logic immediately takes up Kant, etc., there will be little sense from this, unless only, a mess in the head. But the question of the plan is not part of my task. 2. About reading basic books. Suppose that we have before us an important, basic book for self-education. How to read it? I will try to give several indications on this score, borrowing them from the experience of numerous readers, starting with data taken from the books of famous thinkers and figures, ending with my own humble experience. What I am going to present is, as it were, a maximum program. It can, of course, be weakened and diminished according to the importance of the book and the circumstances. In this case, I will focus my main attention on reading scientific books. I will mention in passing about inspiring books. I will say a little more about reading works of art. 3. Inspirational books. In my opinion, they are essential. In everyday life, it is necessary from time to time to listen to voices calling for lofty goals. They are an inexhaustible source of inspiration, hope, cheerfulness. In books you can find both, and it's a pity if a person does not know how to use it, he loses a lot. Such books have to be read by passive reading and reread them. In the same way, there is no place for criticism. The whole task is to absorb thoughts and moods, to be infected with them, to experience them. As a rule, such books have to be searched for, groped for. Not every book is suitable for every reader in this respect. If the book fits, read it passively. Mark or write down in a separate notebook the places that are most powerful for you, so that later you can easily find them, read, reread, absorb into yourself and thus maintain strength, and draw inspiration for your activities, and educate yourself. But the book will bring comparatively little benefit, sometimes even harm, if we do not make it a rule after each reading to think about how the impulses, motivations, and aspirations we have received to apply to our business, to our life in its current situation, and we ourselves do not translate them as soon as possible, into action. Thought translated into action is the basis of good skill, not translated is often a step towards creating a dreamer. 4. Reading works of art. It requires, at least for the first time, passive reading. Only after this follows reading with elaboration. If you, while reading a poem, at the same time analyze it, it will be very clever, maybe, passing the time, but not the perception of a work of art. We must remember, I repeat, how we read our favorite poems of our beloved poet. We surrender to them, we worry, we drink them. As soon as the analysis began, a completely different activity began, of course not only useful, but also necessary. But analysis into parts, criticism, clarification of the plan is not the perception of a work of art. The perception of large-scale works, for example, War and Peace or any novel in general, cannot but be accompanied by breaks, during which, of course, sometimes there is a discussion, an assessment. Further, the passivity of reading cannot be maintained at the same height. In other places, involuntary thoughts arise about what is read, approval, disapproval, notes, especially among people who are already accustomed to the analysis and criticism of this kind of works. But deliberately they should not be invoked. And we must remember that we experience the best works of art only when we read quite passively. Only then are we able to fully feel in them, to embody in our imagination, to experience what the author has experienced. 5. The role of imagination. Here, more than anywhere else, the analogy with music, which I have already mentioned above, is imposed. Just as music requires two artists, a composer and a performer, so reading works of art requires an author and a reader. Just as a performer of a great piece of music is often not at his height, and sometimes a Beethoven sonata under a barbaric hand turns into a pitiful strumming, so in the mind of a bad reader the greatest work of art can be reflected in the most incomplete, distorted, ugly way. Of course, in this case, as in the case of a performer of musical works, a lot depends on innate and developed abilities. The artist-reader is, of course, a kind of talent. But each of us is obliged to use the abilities given to him in the best way. Here I consider it necessary to remind you of the rule, let your imagination run wild where necessary. This is the key to a lot. If you haven't, give it a try. When it goes well, it's as if some kind of witchcraft will take place, the work of art will come to life, speak, blossom with 1,000 previously unnoticed flowers. Use all kinds of imaginations, visual, auditory, tactile and olfactory imagery. Then, reading, for example, the well-known from the anthology description of Leo Tolstoy's Ride for Long, you, sitting in your room, will survive both the trip and the storm, you will see the flash of lightning, feel a gust of wind, hear majestic thunderclaps, experience all the impressions of young Turgenev. When the imagination touches the people portrayed in the novel, they will put on flesh and blood for you and come to life, you will see them and hear them. It is worth the work to develop the skill for this. This reading, at least for the first time, takes work. In order to vividly and distinctly imagine the picture drawn by the author, the person he depicts, it is necessary for the most part to reread the description more than once, sometimes several times. It is necessary to make an effort, sometimes significant, in order to vividly link into one image and complement the individual features sketched by the artist. This work is sometimes difficult, but surprising in the results and exciting. 6. Rereading. Sometimes one hears that art has the main goal of aesthetic pleasure. Of course, this is the deepest mistake. Its tasks are extremely versatile and multifaceted. The art of poetry, by the way, gives, when used correctly, an immense expansion of human experience in the field of feeling, and in the field of desire, and in the field of observation and thought. We kind of merge with the thoughts and feelings of the author and his heroes, we become in their position, we experience what they experienced, we look at the world through their eyes, evaluate by their assessment. We expand our small individual experience and test it with the experience of other people, outstanding, talented, sometimes great. We experience the lives of many in one life. This benefit cannot be sufficiently appreciated. But in order to properly understand and experience a large work of art, you need to reread it, and more than once. In addition to various other conditions that cause this need, it must be remembered that the work read for the first time has a great interest in novelty for us, the plot interests, etc. When rereading, this interest disappears, in return we pay attention to other, more essential aspects. Real experience and understanding of a work of art is possible only through rereading. 7. Reading criticism. Criticism of a work of art being read should not be picked up before reading the book itself. This weakens, sometimes kills amateur performance, forcing one to involuntarily look at the book through other people's glasses. Only after reading the book, having worked it out on our own, having made a personally feasible analysis and assessment of it, we can usefully read a good criticism of it. Then we will see that in criticism we agree with our conclusions, that we do not agree, we recognize our mistakes, compare our approach to the book with the approach of criticism, get an object lesson in the art of criticism. But, of course, if a book is not read for self-education purposes, it is often necessary to go the other way. In self-education, we read the best books previously selected by others, so that with the overall we are already familiar assessment. In other reading tasks, we are faced with completely new or completely unknown books. Here we have to decide the question, is it worth choosing such and such a book or not? And in this case, we often turn first to a review or to a bibliographic note about a book or even to criticism.